Hey Atlanta, say hello to Small Business Help from Apple. That's right, we're here to make starting and running your business simpler. From helping you choose the right devices to setting them up hassle-free, we can help you build your business in no time. Speak to a business expert and get the help you need at no cost whatsoever. At Apple, we're open for your small business. Go to apple.com/smallbusiness or visit an Apple store to learn more.
When you need mealtime inspiration, it's worth shopping Kroger for thousands of appetizing ingredients that inspire countless mouth-watering meals. And no matter what tasty choice you make, you'll enjoy our everyday low prices. Plus, extra ways to save, like digital coupons worth over $600 each week and up to $1 off per gallon at the pump with points. So you can get big flavors and big savings. Kroger, fresh for everyone. Fuel restrictions apply.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Underrated Movie Podcast. This is a podcast where we discuss films that are underrated, underappreciated, and ones that have flown under the radar and passed most people by. It is the first episode of 2025, and to bring in the new year, we are continuing a tradition that I started last year, where I bring in the host from the other podcast that I do, the other film podcast, the Midnight Film Society, and that would be my boy, Damien. How's it going, man?
Going freaking good. Ow!
Yeah, so, for those who aren't aware, every January, like I was saying, kind of exchange shows where this episode will be showing up on his feed, and then also the episode that we're going to do talking about the top 10 films of 2024 is going to show up on this feed. I guess it already did. Time is a weird thing. We're still in 2024 as we're recording this, but you guys are in the far-off future of 2025. But yeah, we are going to be talking about The Wolfman, distinct from The Wolfman, or just Wolfman. It's 2010's The Wolfman, all one word, as opposed to the original, which is The Wolf Face Man, or this 2025's No The Wolfman. So just to clarify any confusion on that one, this is, of course, the one directed by Joe Johnston, starring Benicio del Toro, Anthony Hopkins, Emily Blunt, and Hugo Weaving. So this, I know, was a first-time watch for you, Damien. This gothic horror film, and I will mention also that the screenplay is by Andrew Kevin Walker and David Self. Yeah, it kind of worked out. I pitched you a list of movies. I was like, hey, which one do you want to cover? And you said, The Wolfman, let's talk about that. I was like, cool, another fan of The Wolfman. You're like, actually, I haven't seen it. I threw a dart at a board. And I was like, well, it still works. There's the new Wolfman movie's coming out a week after this, so this kind of lines up perfectly.
Yeah.
What did you think of The Wolfman, Damien?
Yeah, I actually liked it a lot. I was going into it not expecting to like it. I think there's a movie like this has gotten a lot of negativity around it just because it's like, oh, okay, it's fine. It's not great. It's not, as they say, Citizen Kane, but what is, right? But yeah, I think a lot of these people had a lot of fun making it. Del Toro, just watching an interview with the makeup artist, Rick Baker.
Yes.
Talking about working with Del Toro. Yeah, one of the greats, talking about working with Del Toro. And Del Toro is apparently also a freak for this stuff. He loves this stuff. So they did a pretty great homage, I would say, to the original, especially starting off with the classic Universal logo at the beginning. So yeah, I actually did have a very good time with this film. How about you?
I'm really glad to hear that.
Yeah. Unlike last time where I came in, what were we talking about last time?
Spider-Man 3. That's why I was like, I'll let him pick. Yeah. I was like, hey, come on, talk about this one. I was like, I'll let him pick. I'll let him pick one that he likes. And you still not, but I'm glad it worked out that you actually did really like this one. Because, this is a movie that, as always, since I first saw it, I've thought was honestly a great film. It's one of those movies where, like, a lot of times, you know, on this show, I'll talk about movies. I'm like, okay, I get why people didn't like it at the time, or, you know, I see how this movie has its flaws, but I still have a soft spot for it. This is one of those movies where I'm just like, did we watch the same movie? Did I see the same movie as the critics and the audiences? Because I think this movie is honestly fucking great. You know, this is a movie that did pretty poorly at the box office. It has like a 32% on Rotten Tomatoes or something like that.
Yep.
Nobody really talks about this film, even in casual conversation, I feel like, with anything other than, yeah, that movie kind of sucked. But I think it is honestly phenomenal. Like I mentioned, it's gothic horror, and getting almost, you know, speaking of Del Toro's, a different Del Toro, Crimson Peak vibes. That, of course, is a gothic romance, as I covered in the episode when I talked about that one. But as I also mentioned in that episode, gothic horror and gothic romance are very connected. You know, they are both, you know, coming out of the 1800s, you know, all these great novels from the time. And, you know, there is a lot of, while this is clearly a gothic horror, there is a lot of like that gothic romance, the period pieces, the like longing looks that Del Toro will give Emily Blunt as she's laying there in her black wake dress, you know. It's really incredible in that regard. And like you mentioned, the great makeup in this, that is a callback to the original film. Also great score that is calling back to the original film by Danny Elfman, who is a creep, but also he can write some good music, I will say. But it feels like it really bridges that gap of being like, yes, this is a love letter to that original. We're respecting the source material. We're not going some crazy new direction or doing something ridiculous with it, but it is still managing to tell a new and distinct story, a new take on the source material. And for me, I feel like that take is this story about family trauma, and which was admittedly kind of present in the original, but it really hits home here. You know, this guy who has he's basically been kind of like mentally abused by his dad his whole life, and that he's been shipped off to the asylum. I think it plays with how that kind of stuff can even impact our memory. You see his memory of his mom's like early on, and it's clearly like wonky, and it's been kind of messed with. Probably that's why he got shipped off to that asylum, and then that true memory awakens later on. So I thought all that super well done, and it really can't think of another at least recent gothic romance that feels like this, you know, where it's shot on real sets, where it is still using CGI stuff very effectively, I might add, when you have these almost like Animorphs-like transformations where there's bones cracking and blood is coming out of them, and it looks like horrific, and his eyes are, you know, it's like something like out of The Substance or something, where it's just like fucking horrific.
Yeah.
But it also uses that makeup, that great makeup. It's shot on so many real sets. Yeah. All of these really great before. You have all these like Shakespearean-ass actors being like, Lawrence, let me tell you about the wolf and how good it feels to be a wolf, and you're the heir to my throne, bones. And, you know, you've got Anthony Hopkins, of course. You've got great chemistry between Del Toro and Blunt. And then I think that Hugo Weaving is doing some really great work in this. You know, he's the kind of naysayer, the kind of like, you know, he's got that great Hugo Weaving voice, Mr. Lawrence, and he's the one who's kind of the skeptic, but then he actually sees it all happen for him, and he's that trope of, yet like, you don't hunt monsters, he who hunts monsters. And you know, full spoilers for all this, that ending I think is fucking killer. Right? Yeah. Where it has to be Emily Blunt, which I feel like, I'll just stand on my soapbox real fast, and I think a lot of the reason people didn't like this movie is they misunderstood the ending. They missed the kind of lore where there's the whole thing about Emily Blunt has to be the one to kill him because she loves him, otherwise his soul will essentially be cursed to damnation, and if someone who kills him loves him, then he will be redeemed, which I think also ties into that, you know, trauma thing. You know, how do you get over trauma? By finding people who love and accept you, whether that's a family member or a romantic interest or going to therapy, whatever it might be, accepting your past traumas and moving on with someone who actually has your best intent at heart. But so I love that it ends like that with this, and it's not like, Van Helsing or something. It's like, we found a cure for wellness. It's like, no, you're not gonna cure this shit. He's got to be fucking capped at the end, you know. But then you have Hugo Weaving ending up as the monster, and it just kind of like pans up, and it's like, oh shit, that's such a great fucking ending, you know. And I think some people maybe thought it was like a cliffhanger or just like kind of a cop out, but I'm like, no, that's great. This guy who's been just the one who wants my, like, now it's him. Fucking 10 out of 10 ending as far as I'm concerned. What did you think about the ending?
The ending was very good. Yeah, I had to rewind it a couple times just to see, like, okay, that did actually happen. You know, it's the guy, like you were mentioning, he who hunts monsters carefully don't become one, right? So I think that is not like we were talking about substance not being subtextual. That's not very subtextual. But yeah, very, you know, ironic ending of the guy. He didn't really believe it at first, right? He was not really skeptic. He was a skeptic, right? And so was the doctor, obviously, because I love those scenes where you have the doctor or whoever is completely sure that the guy is just making it up. I love this transformation scene in the auditorium of the mental asylum where the guy's just talking and everyone's like, "Doctor, no, shut up 1 second. Let me continue my monologue." And then like, doctor. He's like, "What? Holy shit."
If I flew out the window. And then it's nice. Set up and callback. Good stuff.
Rick Baker was talking about that scene being the only one that was fully CG and how they wouldn't allow him on set that day. They were talking about how they were going to try to differentiate between this and American Werewolf in London, which is obviously one of the most famous transformations of all time on screen. So it does definitely harken back to that with the shots of each appendage, each foot and hand transforming with each other and sort of like growing and mutating and cracking. And I thought the sound design could have used a little bit more of that, like just cracking and muscles and bones and things breaking and separating and growing. I thought the audio sound design could have used a bit of work there, but yeah, then to answer your question, the ending definitely did work for me. And just going back to a thing you were mentioning before about not seeing anything recently with a good gothic romance and architecture and production design. I guess that means you have not seen, as we're recording this, you have not seen Nosferatu yet.
That's fair. Yeah, that's true. That's a very good point. I'm seeing that on the first of the year, so I'll have seen it when the episode's out. But yeah, that's why I'm very excited for that, because I feel like Robert Eggers is one of the few people that Hollywood will still, that has those kind of like tendencies that Hollywood will still give a budget to.
Yes, they do, and so I'm very excited for you to see Nosferatu. But getting back to the Wolfman, I agree wholeheartedly with everything you said. I want to emphasize the costume design done by Melina Cananero, who was won costume design for Barry Lyndon, which she won her first of apparently her 4 Academy Awards. So yeah, very good costume design. Going back to what you were saying with the practical effects, the set design, and then that extends to the costuming work there. Obviously, Rick Baker doing all of the makeup and effects there. And yeah, I think everybody, you mentioned Hugo Weaving. I think he's a guy that just loves weird shit. He loves being in weird shit. I was pulling up his IMDb and going over all of his work over the years, especially in a movie we talked about. Did we talk about it on a podcast about the Jupiter Ascending, that movie where he's just so out there, right?
We've definitely talked about it at some point on one of between the 2 years we do, or that we do, and then you coming on here.
Yeah, the early on '94, he's a crossdresser in Adventures of Priscilla, Queen of the Desert. In '94, he's Australian, so that was a big one for Australian indie scene then, and obviously The Matrix was the big one that everyone knows about him. And I frequently at one of my older jobs now, always quote him in my head where he's touching Morpheus's face with his finger and just going, "I hate these people, their breath and their skin and they sweat and I fucking taste their fucking bullshit." I'm quoting that in my mind all the time when I'm dealing with the public. And then of course there's Elrond doing that, like, you know, I think he's bringing some of that Shakespearean affect to the Wolfman that he brought to Elrond in the Lord of the Rings movies that he was in. Then of course V for Vendetta. So the guy just loves taking big swings. I think he loves big broad genre content, not content, sorry, performances. He loves doing great. He loves taking on, stories and projects like that where you can really, obviously, and Red Skull, this back-to-back, 2011, 2010, Wolfman to Red Skull was a great back-to-back year.
Both Joe Johnston joints.
Yeah, exactly. So really great couple of years there. And obviously Anthony Hopkins being Hannibal Lecter, having that sort of, subtle creepiness to him definitely brought that to here. And I love like halfway into the movie where it's kind of revealed of what his lineage is and where he's coming from and what Hopkins actually is. And I love how he comes down the stairs with his hair slicked back, reminiscent of his Lecter hair. And he has like these, he has a little bit of eyeshadow.
Eyes, so
his eyes.
It's like Nightman. It's like popping,
very other times like emo Hannibal Lecter in this movie. I loved. Apparently, it was Geraldine Chaplin, daughter of Charlie Chaplin, as the Maleva, what do you call them? The
Romani.
Romani, yes, people there. Danny Elfman's score was okay. I could take it or leave it. It's not super memorable. What did you think of the music and the score in this film?
I thought I was a big fan of it. I thought it really, like so much else of the film, harkened back to that classic Universal monsters feel. Those films like of the 30s to 50s, in the same way that another werewolf movie that was actually directed by a composer, Werewolf by Night, did. I was a big fan of it feeling like kind of like traditional and like you have the strings but it's still feeling like a modern adaptation, because like when you go back and rewatch some of those movies, you're like, oh, okay, I can appreciate this, but like they're kind of dated, like when you compare them to like a modern Mummy or whatever it might be. The original one, it's like they're pretty slow and there's a lot of like people in rooms explaining like, and the curse of the werewolf was caused by this, like it's like the ending of Psycho type thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, I really did quite enjoy that music, and I think it tied into that wider aspect of, making these movies feel like they are truly of that lineage. And while I am excited for the new one, I guess we'll see in a week how it turns out. And I really like the new Invisible Man. So same, production company, director, and all that stuff. I feel like you lose a little something when it's like, it is set in the modern thing. It's a little different than this movie, which is this big, sweeping gothic horror with waterfalls that people are looking over while they talk about their dead brother. Like, yes, you dated my dead brother, but we're kind of falling in love, and you've got it. And they're in like these big purity piece outfits. Like, it looks like a spooky Pride and Prejudice. That shit is so good, and I'm so glad we're gonna get that. We have Nosferatu, because it's been now 15 years since we've gotten a proper one of these from a studio on this scale.
Yeah.
So, yeah, very, very excited to see that. I know you've already seen it, and that's really cool. And, I think that the music ties into the wider feel of the movie, because I think this movie looks immaculate. The cinematography of this movie, the way that there'll be like these beautiful time lapses. There's like all these locations with like fog and natural lighting, and people will there'll be shots where like first time you see the Wolfman's face at all is when somebody shoots a gun and the kind of muzzle flash lights them up, and you're like, and it's that classic look, but it's kind of updated. There's so many incredible moments like that, and definitely want to shout out the cinematographer, Shelley Johnson, who has worked a lot with Joe Johnston. She would work on him again with Captain America. They worked together on Jurassic Park 3, which not the greatest movie in my opinion, but the dinosaurs look pretty cool in it. I will say there's some good shots of like pterodactyls and shit. So definitely knows what she's doing. And the way that the moon is like just portrayed in this is kind of like omnipotent thing that has the power of these people's lives feels so fucking cool. What did you think about the way this movie was shot?
Yeah, it was actually shot really, really well. I loved all the silhouetted moments, especially near the end where Emily Blunt's character is chasing him throughout the woods there. Yeah, shot and edited, edited by the legendary Walter Murch. So you have that there. So much like
shout out to Walter Murch. We talked about him a lot on we talked about Return to Oz, the only movie he directed.
Dude, yeah. So I mean, just think about all of these names we're talking about in a fucking Wolfman movie. It came together to make a very good project. But sometimes those too many cooks in the kitchen, too much prestige in one movie can sort of overwhelm it. But I think it worked really well here.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear you say that.
Talking about, you were asking about, the camera work and the cinematography. I love going back to the I don't know if it was natural lit, probably not, but just I remember really being taken aback by I think the first scene where Del Toro's character comes back to his castle, or no, I think he was after he was bitten. Hopkins is blowing out all the candles, and I love how all the candles are sort of displayed. I think they're displayed on like either tusks or some sort of like giant tooth. So I thought that was a really interesting touch. Like this whole movie has like very interesting touches to it. I think people really put all of their weight behind this, cinematography wise, set design wise, costume design. So yeah, I think, going back to what we were saying in the beginning of this being a very unappreciated and there we go, underseen and underrated film. I think it's kind of the epitome of all that stuff.
Yeah, there's one shot in particular that I really love that always sticks with me whenever I see this movie, and it's when Lawrence has kind of gone back to the house to confront his dad and to try and, essentially end this curse. And you see his dad is just playing the piano, and there's just like a close-up of his hands playing the piano, and then it cuts back to Lawrence, and it cuts back to the piano, and then you see the fingerprints that he's like leaving blood on these pristine white keys. It's so chilling and effective. It's telling you exactly what you need to know. Like, oh, this motherfucker just killed somebody. And then you see Singh is dead, and then it's like, yep, he's just like, it's totally tells you everything you need to know about Anthony Hopkins' mental state, and it's also a really cool fucking shot. It's really just like, oh wow, okay, like this is some gothic horror ass shit.
Yes, it really is. That whole thing was a really nice touch. Yeah, just going back to like the thing about these actors in this, you're like, oh my god, they're so prestigious, and they all are very Shakespearean actors. I love that touch was in there of Lawrence being a Shakespearean actor, right? So I think that was very interesting that they have. I think he comes back, and I think Hopkins says something about that of being like, maybe I'll catch it one day. Maybe you think you're so special playing other people. Maybe that'll work out for you one day. But yeah, Hopkins is such a weird guy, because looking up his filmography as well, just to see all of the weird shit he's been in for his career. Obviously, he began sort of not began, but in 80 he's in sort of a not creature feature, but a gothic horror. Maybe I guess we could call it gothic romance. The Elephant Man, right? It's very similar sort of thing where he's taking advantage of somebody who's disfigured and has a everybody wants to see him, everyone wants to exploit him, right? So it's an interesting sort of 30-year journey that Hopkins took from Elephant Man to Wolfman. Obviously, he was in famously Transformers: The Last Night. He was in the Thor movie, so he's no slouch. He's no amateur when it comes to, he's no rookie, I should say, when it comes to big genre fare, right?
Yeah, no, for sure. He's in a lot of stuff, and it's funny because whenever I think of him in a genre movie, I always think of when I was a theater major for a hot minute, and there was one class I took, and one of our assignments was to like find a scene that was like, this is just like a great performance. And for the teacher's scene that he showed us all, it was the entire movie of Remains of the Dead, where he's just like, look at Anthony Hopkins just like acting his fucking heart out. And he basically told us the whole story of Hopkins having this process where he like goes to a hotel room and like gets super into character and just reads the script over and over and is like mentally transforms himself into this character. And I was like, how does he do that for like, I am now a wolf, like I'm just like, what is the process for that going to a hotel, or like I am now the king of Asgard, I always think of him just sitting in a hotel room being like, yes, Lawrence, I'm going to eat your brother, like some shit like that. But yeah, I really like the the symbolism, the imagery that's in this. Obviously, he kills the mom, then he kills the brother, which is reminiscent to, there's even some like little inserts you see of pages that Emily Blunt is looking at where that is the original myth of Lycaon from like ancient Greece and stuff like that, so it's tying in all these cool things. But I want to kind of switch gears a little bit and talk about something we've danced around a little bit, which is Joe Johnston and his career, because I think he is, in my opinion, probably my favorite journeyman, working director, whatever you want to call it, like hired gun.
Yeah.
He's not one of these guys that you think of as like, oh, these like a Robert Eggers, where it's like, yeah, this guy wants to make his Nosferatu project. He's more of a guy like, we need to hire somebody to make a Captain America movie. Who are we going to get? Oh, get the guy who did the Rocketeer, you know? He's one of those guys. And I think for my money, he is the absolute best in the business at that, as being like, hey, we need to get a guy who's really good director, step into this role and do something great. Because he's somebody I've covered on Underrated. Speaking of the Rocketeer, we covered the Rocketeer early on in this podcast, but he's done just a ton of bangers, you know, like the 90s hashtag 90s kids will remember, you know, Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, Jumanji, mentioned Jurassic Park 3, and then obviously he does Captain America First Avenger, so I think he's integral to the, you know, history of Marvel. But he has a really interesting career, and if anybody out there has seen the Light and Magic documentary on Disney Plus, I highly recommend it. He's brought up quite a bit in that because he basically gets his start as being working in visual effects on Star Wars. He's like one of those original ILM guys, you know. Then he works on, like, you know, Empire Strikes Back, Indiana Jones, all those kind of great, you know, Lucasfilm movies. And Willow even, I think. But then he's like, George Lucas is like, hey, you know, I think you've got like a knack for this directing thing. And he's like, yeah, well, you know, I can't really stop and, you know, go to film school or whatever. You know, I'm already in the industry. I'm going to keep doing it. And Lucas is like, you know what, dude? And I will always respect George Lucas for this. He says, hey, I'm going to pay your tuition to USC to go be a director, and I'll still you pay half salary that you're getting from ILM. And Joe Johnston's like, all right, well, fuck. Yeah, I'm going to do that. He comes out the other side, starts directing hit movies. So I think that's such an interesting, unique career path, and why he is so good, because he had this kind of weird path to directing that you don't see a lot, where he was already working in the industry, then became a director and became a very good director, and he was mentored by fucking George Lucas.
Yeah. Sort of a similar track that Phil Tippett had, right? We were talking about him when we watched Mad God, I think last year. But yeah, very similar thing. It's interesting how many people come out of that school. Well, not really school, but, you know, come out of ILM. Obviously, somebody like Adam Savage worked a little bit in there and sort of did, you know, the Mythbusters thing. But it is very, very interesting how many people, you know, James Cameron, didn't work for them, but it's in that same vein of those guys that we talk about a lot, being part of the new Hollywood era, and a little bit afterwards of talking about the directors a lot, the directors that came out of it, and directors that worked, Lucas and Spielberg, and so many of those guys that, you know, went on to become legendary directors in their own right. And I think you're correct to identify him as well, Joe Johnston, as a guy that's very much a journeyman, very much a guy that makes his movies his way. You know, Rocketeer, you mentioned, Pagemaster. You know, October Sky was something that I was like, oh, that's interesting. Something I remember seeing as a kid and going back to. Yeah, going back to and watching for the performances. And I think Gyllenhaal has mentioned that multiple times about this scene that he's shooting with Chris Cooper, and Cooper saying, like, just, you know, stop. I think he was just like saying, stop acting so hard, start reacting, start actually listening to what I'm saying, as opposed to just saying your lines louder and louder, you know. So that was an interesting project for him and for Gyllenhaal to get off the ground there. You mentioned Jurassic Park 3. Hasn't done too much work since Wolfman and Captain America. The movie called Not Safe for Work in 2014. And then director of reshoots on the Nutcracker in the 4 rounds. But it is one of those. So he is one of those guys that we talk about a lot, of being like, you know, sort of lost in the wilderness for a while. Hopefully he will find his way back sooner than later. Yeah,
you know, like I said, I think the reason he gets kind of brought in to do the Nutcracker, which I think is one of the few films of his I haven't seen, is because they needed to get somebody. They were like, who can we get? And Joe Johnston is somebody you can plug in. You know, he's not your Christopher Nolan's and your Robert Eggers are not going to be like, oh, I'm just going to come do reshoots on this cursed Disney movie. That Joe Johnston will. And most of the time, he's somebody who will navigate that pretty well. But I think at that point, that film was probably beyond saving.
It probably was. Yeah. So yeah, I really liked you know, Wolfman. I liked a couple of years ago, I went through and watched all the original Universal movies past Halloween. I watched a lot of the Hammer classics that they did on Screen Jest recently, all the, you know, like 70s Christopher Lee stuff. Just in general, I think I forgot to mention or forgot to talk about, like, what do you finding these movies? How do you like the original Universal stuff, and how does this remake sort of compare to that stuff for you?
Yeah, I mean the original Universal stuff. I watched it all years ago when I was like a early teenager, maybe even earlier than that. I think it was because The Mummy was such a big thing when I was like 9 when that movie came out, and so I was like, this movie's great. I got to watch the original. Okay, now I'm gonna watch it. And that's when I watched the Wolfman movie. You know, I think I watched a lot of those other classic Universal ones. Not all of them, I don't think. You know, because there's just so many.
Yeah.
But they're cool. They have a lot of cool concepts that carry over into their modern remakes, but a lot of them are dated. I think the remakes are kind of hit or miss. You obviously get some great ones, and you get some that are not as great. You know, obviously you get your 2017, 2018 Mummy, but then you get a lot of other good ones. So I guess with that, I wanted to ask you the question of, do you have a favorite remake of these movies, of these classic Universal monster movies, or it can be a horror movie in general? But I think that because these are movies that Universal is clearly really desperate to do something with this IP. They tried that whole Dark Universe thing at least once or twice. Didn't take off, obviously, but there have been some hits, there have been some misses. What are some of the ones that work the most for you, besides this one, of course?
Yes. Well, being the sick body horror freak I am, Werner Herzog's Nosferatu from the 70s had, if you go back and watch that, speaking of practical effects, speaking of putting actors actually in maybe possible danger, there's a lot of rats in that movie. I won't spoil or say anything about the new Nosferatu, but there's definitely some callbacks to that there. Like I said, I did go back and watch some of the Hammer movies from the 70s, some really great ones. Curse of the Frankenstein, I would probably say is the standout of that bunch there. The originals, like you said, are fine. They're very short. Bride of Frankenstein is very strange in that you only see the bride for the last 7 minutes. I think I mentioned that when I watched that. One I really need to see. What was this one I have to see? And like, oh my God, everyone's talking about that one as being like, just not necessarily like traditional horror, monster horror movie, but like a take on it, and it has meta commentary, is Monster Squad from the late 80s, I want to say.
Okay.
Like 88, 89. Yeah, I don't know if you've seen that one.
I have not.
Yeah, I heard it's fairly good. Trying to look through some of the classics. Yeah, a lot of the Dracula ones. Obviously, Bram Stoker's Dracula is an all-timer classic. I think I saw a lot of comparisons to this one on reviews on Letterboxd. That one, I think, it's just so dramatic and so big and broad, and the performances are just out there and crazy, especially with Gary Oldman and all of that stuff. I think that is something that's something that's missing from here. Just that one guy, that thing. Del Toro's doing his thing there, sort of, but and Hopkins is as well. But there is just something about Coppola's 92 Dracula that still sticks in my mind as far as the makeup, the lighting, the performances. They did a thing on Corridor Crew, breaking all that stuff down in the interstitial moments, the transitions from, okay, we're going from Transylvania to American, right, and these silhouetted, I forget what they call, composite shots of the map and the train, the lighting there was really impressive. So it is incredible. The entire production of that movie really does stick out in my mind. Obviously the Mummy, 1999's Mummy, yes, just
masterpiece
for yes, for people our age. I think I have to probably go with that as my favorite of the modern stuff.
Yeah. I mean, that one's clearly the one that kicked off this whole thing. It's I got the chance to see it in theaters for its 25th anniversary last year, and that was really cool getting to see that movie on the big screen. First time, I don't remember if I saw it when I was a kid, so maybe first time ever. That one clearly needs to be mentioned. Like you said, there's been a ton of Dracula movies over the years, and I actually haven't seen the Coppola version, so that's been on my list.
Oh wow!
But yeah, I already shouted out Invisible Man. I think Lee Winnell's Invisible Man is really good.
That's the new one and the original, actually. I think of the original, Universal ones. Invisible Man is actually one of the best.
Yeah. It's very, very good. Fun story. I actually know the granddaughter of the actor who played the Invisible Man, Claude Rains. But but yeah, and I think Invisible Man does the same thing as this movie does, where this old story and recontextualizes it, and instead of being about family trauma like this one, it's about stalking and domestic abuse and all that stuff. And then, to swivel back to Dracula and to swivel back to things that are underrated, I actually kind of like Dracula Untold. I think that movie, it's not, like I said, it's not Citizen Kane, but it's having fun. It's like Luke Evans is doing like his weird like, yes, I am the Prince of Transylvania, and I can turn into bats now. And it's like Batman Begins of Dracula movies, and I kind of love it for that, I mean, I haven't seen it since it came out, like Halloween of like 2013 or whatever. So maybe I need to go back to it, and if maybe it'll come up someday on this show. Who knows?
Yeah. Yeah, maybe. That'd be nice. That'd be a nice one to cover. Yep.
Yeah. Any final thoughts on any of these movies or on Wolfman before we get out of here?
Yeah, no, it was a nice treat actually. I think there's a lot of movies from the mid 2000s to late 2000s that are. I think there's a lot of ground to mine there as far as like hidden gems, and this is definitely one of them. And definitely, glad to have finally checked this out. There's so much here to enjoy. I think I wasn't aware, just first of all, who directed it. I wasn't aware of the amount of the cast in there, the ensemble cast. Really, I think you get to a point where it's just like everybody's in there. Interesting. Asa Butterfield, apparently, one of the early Terrence was one of the young.
Oh, he's Terrence, like the kid version. Interesting.
Yeah,
I didn't even clock that.
Yeah, and like I said, everything, production design, costuming, music was okay, but everything else was, really. It's a movie that I think is slept on, underseen, underrated, underappreciated, all of those things. It's really, really glad I finally checked out Wolfman, and I'm very excited. Got me extra excited to see Christopher Abbott in the new one. I was mentioning to Dion, mutual friend Dion, about how he is Christopher Abbott. I've been a fan of his for a long time before this, and I'd be very excited to see large mainstream audience see him for the first time. I was mentioning how he's basically like store brand Jon Snow, store brand Kit Harington, but I would say I think is a better actor than Kit Harington. Just as much as I've seen of them both, I think I'll take Christopher Abbott over Kit Harington any day.
Okay, because I'm on the opposite side of that coin for the new Wolfman. I'm very excited for. I've been a big fan of Julia Garner, for a very long time, going back to like, The Americans and a lot of stuff she did when she was younger. Now she's like a, adult actress. Not an adult actress, but you understand what I'm saying. Pretty stoked to see how this movie does. And if it's half as good as this Wolfman, I'm probably going to like it quite a bit. But to put a pin in this discussion we've had. This, I feel like, one of those movies where people talk about like how we didn't realize how good we had it, and like this is a movie that, at the time people were like, oh, this movie's so bad, blah, 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 and then you look at it and you're like, this looks so fucking good. And it's like everything, like all the movies are fucking shot on the volume or some shit like now. And you're like, no, this movie is like, it looks incredible. Like it's there. And I think there's a lot of stuff like that where like, these movies from like the 2010s where they were putting all this money into it and they were using practical and special effects in equal regards, like that's why people like, you always see this stuff like come up on like TikTok or whatever, just like, wow, like look at how good Davy Jones looked. The mid 2000 CGI was the best, and it wasn't better than what we have now. They just like it's gonna be shot in the dark. They're gonna do this transformation scene here. We're gonna use practical effects and splice them together. So we didn't realize how good we had it. Go back, revisit. Before you see the new Wolfman, see the Wolfman from 2010.
Yes, I highly recommend doing that as well. Yep.
Damien, as I mentioned, we do a show together on Mondays when this doesn't come out, Midnight Film Society. What can you tell the people about that?
Yeah, so this is definitely coming out later, right? How long after now?
This will be this is on the 13th of January this comes out.
So probably 2 weeks after Best of the Year show has been released, has been put out, has been put into the wild.
Yeah, it should be 1 week because I think
I think so.
Yeah, it's 2 weeks from when we're recording.
Yeah, so we will have done our Best of the Year show, something I look forward to every year. I know you do as well. Still compiling my stuff, still writing down my stuff, still seeing some stuff that may or may not make my best of the year list. So definitely want to check that stuff out. Midnight Film Society, anywhere to get podcasts. YouTube, it's actually on YouTube. That's probably one of the ways you can see it most easily with your phone or whatever. It's on Spotify. It's on Pocket Cast. It's on all the things. Rate it on Apple iTunes. Go there, rate it. It's on OnlyFans. It's on Pornhub. It's on all the things. But yeah, check that out. Midnight Film Society on all the things.
Yep. And, anybody out there, if you're looking for more stuff, well, first of all, if you could rate the show 5 stars on however you're listening to it, it helps us out quite a bit. But if you're looking for even more underrated, there's also a Patreon you can check out for as low as $1 a month. There's also $3 and $5 options where you can get a bonus podcast at $3 and even choose episodes once you've been a $5 patron for a certain amount of time. But we're going to be restarting our bonus podcast. Last year, we were doing sports movies. This year is a new bonus podcast called Across the Second Dimension, where I cover 3D films that were released originally in 3D that are now going to be reviewed in 2D and see how they hold up in that format. First film is going to be one of the worst films of all time, Jaws 3D. That's going to be coming out just a couple days after this is released. So head over to Patreon to check that out. Underratedmoviepodcast.com for all the links everywhere. Patreon.com/underratedmoviepodcast and Underrated Movie Podcast on all of the apps. Thank you once again, Damien, for being on, and thank you everyone out there for listening.
Bye-bye.